Hey guys, how you doing? So welcome to chapter 5. Now in this chapter we're going to kind of broaden our scale a little bit, looking beyond just the regular organism, and we're going to take a look at traits within organisms and how that looks at adaptations for survival. So let's jump into it. Here we go. All right, adaptations for survival, chapter 5. Now the way that it's laid out is we're going to take a look at generally what adaptations actually mean, and then what we're going to do is we're going to focus on three particular adaptations by plants, adaptations in the heat, and then adaptations in the cold, okay? All right, we're going to start by introducing you to this picture of a tiger, and if we take a look at the image of the tiger, have a think about some of the traits that the tiger has that allows it to survive in the particular environment that it lives in. This particular species of tiger is called the Siberian tiger, and it is actually the largest of all the tiger species. Now, having a look at the image, you can sort of see a few different traits that the tiger has. So for example, you might notice that the tiger has a very fairly thick coat of fur that allows it to withstand the cold Siberian winter. It also has whiskers as well, allowing it to detect its environment. It has eyes that are both forward-facing, giving it binocular vision, and also it has claws and teeth that allows it to grip and catch its prey. It also has stripes, which allows for camouflage, etc., etc. And the list, we can probably keep going. But the main idea is that each of these features that you see on this tiger is an adaptation, a trait that allows the tiger to better fit in and survive in the environment that it is found. Okay? So when we look at adaptations, definition-wise, an adaptation is a genetically controlled structural, behavioural, or physiological feature that enhances the survival of an organism in particular environmental conditions. Yeah. So there's some key words there for you guys to understand. Yeah. That first of all, when we're talking about adaptations, an adaptation is more than just a feature, because it is a feature or a trait that is first of all, it's genetic. In other words, it's part of the organism. It's inbuilt, or the organism has the ability to or it doesn't have the ability to switch it on or switch it off. It's just simply there. Okay. The second thing is that there are three categories of adaptations. You've got your structural adaptation, part of its physical form; behavioural adaptations, which is how the organism behaves; or a physiological adaptation, how the organism functions. The word physiology refers to how an organism functions, how it works, the insides of the organism, and different ways in which the organism is able to change its body in order to fit into its environment. Okay, and the third thing is that an adaptation is suitable only in reference to the environment that it is found in. Yeah, for example, lungs really only work on land, so an adaptation of having lungs allowing us to breathe air is a bit of a useless feature in water. So lungs on land are maladaptive in water. In other words, it's a counter adaptation. It's not a useful thing. It makes it worse for the organism in terms of its survival, right? And so that's the difference between what an adaptation is and a maladaptation. Okay. Now, understanding the category of the adaptations, there are three types: structural, behavioural, or physiological. Different features or different traits are all adaptations, right? So for example, size. Yeah. If we take a look at some species of wolves, grey wolves in particular, have a fairly thick coat. Or actually all wolves have a thick coat, but grey wolves are particularly suited for the winter. The thick coat is what we call a structural adaptation, right? Because the thick coat allows it's part of the organism's structure that it has this coat. It's not like the wolf can simply grow a thin coat or 1 year and then a thick coat the next year. It actually has the thick coat, and that's a structural feature that it contains, or it has. The second thing, during the heat, dogs and canines tend to pant. Rather than having sweat glands, they tend to pant. And the panting is what allows them to release heat through evaporative cooling on their tongue, right? That is a behavioural adaptation, because it is the panting action of the dog, the rapid breathing in and out, that allows it to lose heat. And that's an adaptation that is behavioural, right? A third feature, in the heat, dogs can also, or wolves can also lose heat through a particular process called countercurrent heat exchange, or dilating blood vessels, which allows it to bring closer to the skin, releasing the heat. That is a change in the organism's body that is allowing it to adapt to survive in the changing conditions. The reason why your face gets really flushed when you go for a big run is because all the blood vessels have come close to your skin, have dilated. In other words, they've become bigger, right? Allowing the heat to escape from the blood and then out the skin, cooling you down, which is why you kind of get flushed when you run, right? That is a physiological adaptations, right? Because your body is changing a certain feature of itself in order to adapt, okay? Now, when we talk about adaptations, it's really important to understand tolerance range. An adaptation is really referring to changes in its tolerance range. An organism's tolerance range is the minimum and maximum point that it can tolerate before it, before it kind of just carks it, right? So different tolerance ranges vary for different organisms. Temperature is a very key tolerance range for a lot of organisms. You and I can only keep our temperature within a narrow range of about 36.7 degrees Celsius, and that's our kind of tolerance for our internal environment versus our external environment being, anywhere from about 5 degrees Celsius to maybe about 45-ish degrees Celsius, okay? pH, oxygen, water content or desiccation, light intensity, UV exposure. These are all tolerance ranges for an organism, right? And for an organism, the tolerance range is the minimum maximum point. But within the tolerance range, you have what we call an optimum range. This is what allows the organism to continuously stay in this condition. If it falls outside of the optimum range, it is under a condition of physiological stress. The organism starts to stress out, and it can't maintain those conditions for a long period of time. Otherwise, it begins to malfunction or is unable to survive, right? And then outside of the tolerance range is the zone of intolerance. Okay, so the tolerance range of different organisms can vary according to the adaptations that allows them to survive. So I'll give you 2 examples. The fox that you and I are all fairly familiar with is this one here, right? It is a simian fox, right? And the simian fox has thin brown fur, has a thin body, and it contains less fat deposits, right? Now, the Arctic fox, on the other hand, has thick fur, it's white, it has a large body, and it has more fat deposits, right? If you think about these particular features or adaptations that it has, you can imagine that the tolerance range between one and the other are very different, right? The Arctic fox probably has a tolerance range that is in a lower end in terms of the cold that it can be able to withstand versus the simian fox, and then the simian fox might be able to withstand a higher tolerance range in terms of the amount of temperature, the heat that it has to withstand. Same with water loss, etc., etc. So different adaptation allows them to adapt to the different tolerance ranges, right? When you have an aspect of the environment that affects the organism and limits its ability to the tolerance of the organism, then we call that particular condition the limiting factor. So any condition that approaches or exceeds the limit of tolerance of an organism is called the limiting factor, right? This is a task that you'll be able to do in class, but we'll just sort of have a look here. You can sort of see in a rainforest, limiting factors could include things like soil, sunlight in particular. A lot of trees will grow really rapidly, get to the top, and then block out all of the sunlight from the bottom. So there's a lot of shade in the bottom of the rainforest, and that's actually a limiting factor for a lot of plants that are growing down the bottom. If you go to the intertidal zone, for certain periods of the day, the organisms are stuck in the water. For other periods, it is outside of the water. So the limiting factor might be desiccation or the level of water exposure that the organism has. In areas like swamps and rivers, you might think about the amount of oxygen in the water, for example, being a limiting factor because the water is stagnant, it's stale, it's been sitting there for all day, and all the oxygen can kind of seep out of it, especially if it has an algal bloom or something like that in it. Desert, obviously, limiting factor being water or rain. And then in the snow, limiting factor can also actually be the water or the rain because it gets locked up in ice, right? So that's kind of understanding some of these factors, limiting factors playing a role in some of those areas, okay? Oops. That's just to introduce the idea of an adaptation. We're going to look specific at examples of adaptations in heat, in cold, and then adaptations that plants have to survive, but we'll look at that in the next couple of videos. I'll catch you guys later.